Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a review of the season 1 finale of House of the Dragon, titled The Black Queen. Now there will be spoilers throughout for this episode, so just beware when going to this overall video. Now in terms of this episode itself, to be honest with you, I'm conflicted, as I've championed this show so much throughout this entire run. I've stated that it's probably the best series this year in terms of television, and I was so much looking forward to the finale, where it would take us and all of the potential that it would leave us looking forward to for the season 2. And as an individual episode, I think it was great, but in terms of the overall story and where they were setting up this season, I think it was actually a bit of a massive letdown and also a big disappointment, and it left me frustrated and angry as I was reviewing the events of what happened and how they could have been played out different. Now, if this was a penultimate episode, then fine, perfect. I probably would have given it an 8 or a 9 out of 10. But because this was a finale episode, there was so much that was lacking, and it really is more of the storytelling rather than the overall production in terms of the music or the effects or the action or the performances. So we then go through the events that played out throughout this episode, and we started off very surprisingly catching up with Rhaenyra and Daemon, only just finding out about their father Visery's dying, which happened in the end of episode 8, and we picked up shortly afterwards of the events from episode 9, where we saw Princess Rhaenyra escaping on the dragon after the coronation of Aegon. And she informs both Daemon and Rhaenyra of Visery's passing, and they're generally very shocked and emotionally traumatized, as what you would expect. And I was a bit surprised here because there was some time that had passed from when Viserys died to Aegon's coronation. So you mean to tell me that nobody would have informed either Daemon or Rhaenyra about Viserys passing? They only just found out about it now. So I was a bit confused about that. Yet despite all of that, the couple react to the news in different ways. We see Daemon has already rushed to the conclusion, wrongfully, that Alicent had killed Viserys, and he already sets about bracing for war. We see Rhaenyra distressed physically, and we find out that she's expecting yet another baby. And shortly after finding out about Viserys' death and also Aegon being crowned as king, which affects Rhaenyra because of course she was next in line for the Iron Throne if Viserys had passed away, this sends her into some physical distress, and yet again she goes through another very traumatic childbirth. And for me personally, this was an overly graphic scene. Now that's saying quite a lot considering a show like this or Game of Thrones, but I think we've already had 3 previous childbirth scenes that were quite graphic in nature throughout the series, so I'm not sure we really needed another one. But we went ahead with this, and we see that Rhaenyra loses the baby again, and just the overall nature and what happens, I don't even want to describe it because it was quite horrific to see even for the standards by this show. But she loses the baby, and we see the overall funeral, and we see her very sad and crestfallen, and we see Daemon is completely obsessed with going to war. He doesn't even console Rhaenyra. He doesn't really reflect on the baby's death. And I think again this is another weakness of the quick pace of the show, is that it doesn't really give time for emotional moments like this. It has significant events, but because we're pushing the story forward, we don't really get the chance to see the characters really take in those significant effects and the fallout from it on an emotional level. But despite all of this, the actual sequence of events I thought was very well put together. I really liked all of the music as we saw all of the people attending the funeral. We had one of the soldiers who we saw previously within King's Landing making his way over and claiming to be the next Kingsguard, devoting his cause to Rhaenyra. Of course, he delivered the crown, was in line with the fact that Rhaenyra was now claiming to be the new ruler of Westeros because Viserys had died. And everything here was very well shot as we saw everybody kneeling down to Rhaenyra. I liked how they lit up the map within the table where it showed all of the locations within Westeros and King's Landing, and we saw everybody coming together and planning their strategy on how they were going to attain certain allies for the upcoming fights ahead. We then see the arrival of Otto, aiming to deliver a message to Rhaenyra, asking her for negotiations to surrender her claim to the throne. Now, he initially met up with Daemon, but then we see Rhaenyra arriving later on with one of the dragons, and this is very much a cyclical moment, harking back to the earlier episodes, if you remember, when there was a confrontation between Otto and Daemon, and then Rhaenyra arrived in her younger version alongside the dragon, and this was to avoid a conflict, so this was really a reversal of events in many ways. Now, Otto was offering terms of negotiation, but Daemon just wasn't having any of it. He was already very much in war mode. He wasn't really hearing any of it. Again, great lines of delivery from Matt Smith, who's been very great as this character. And it gets to that point where we think a battle is about to ensure, but Rhaenyra at the last minute wisely delays the answer in terms of the negotiation. And this was the first of many moments when they were really showing how wise Rhaenyra was trying to be as queen. Again, that fits in very much of the journey that she's gone up throughout this entire season. We then had another council meeting where once again they're discussing all of the allies that they could attain and also the current forces that they have. It's established that they have around 13 dragons to the 4 that they have within King's Landing. And Daemon is already ready to go to war, but once again Rhaenyra shows her wisdom in stating that they could use the dragons to easily win the war, but that would result in everything burning down. And what would be the point in ruling a kingdom where everything is burned to the ground? And I think again this is reference to what happened in the final season of Game of Thrones, where of course we saw Daenerys burning everything down when she arrived at King's Landing. We then saw a very intense moment between Daemon and Rhaenyra, clashing again over what to do, with Daemon hell-bent on war. He then grabs Rhaenyra by the throat and she tells him about the prophecy by Viserys, of course the Song of Ice and Fire, where he dreamt about Aegon being the conqueror. Of course, if you remember, going back to episode 8, he was telling this to Alicent, who he thought was Rhaenyra, and Alicent misinterpreted it, feeling that Viserys wanted Aegon, their son, to be the king. And Daemon was very disappointed when Rhaenyra told him about this because he didn't know the prophecy, because of course he was going along the thoughts that he was always chosen to be next in line to be king. So again, just great performances once again in this scene from Matt Smith and also Emma Darcy. We finally, after what it seems like an eternity, catch up with Lord Corlys, who's been missing surely for about 4 episodes. Now, throughout the episodes that he was missing, we've been referencing the fact that he's been going on all of these seafaring adventures, trying to broaden his kingdom, but he ended up being involved in these intense battles and was suffering all of these major injuries. So we see him bedridden after all this time talking to Princess Rhaenyra, and we see that he's very much had a change of heart after all the injuries that he's been through. He no longer wants to pursue the Iron Throne. He's quite happy to stay within their own kingdom and grow up with their grandchildren. But he's convinced by Princess Rhaenyra to actually join the fight. And this was a confusing moment because we had an earlier conversation between the two and he was asking why was she so satisfied by seeing Rhaenyra crowned as queen. And Princess Rhaenyra replied that Rhaenyra was the only restraint holding everybody back in terms of going out to war. And on the one hand it made sense because by seeing Rhaenyra being queen, Rhaenyra was seeing what she could have been, because if you remember from the start of this show, she was passed over as the rightful claim to the throne because nobody would accept a woman ruling Westeros. So she gained some satisfaction by seeing Rhaenyra at the top of the tree, but at the same time she's convinced Lord Corlys to go and support Rhaenyra in the war. We then see another council meeting where Lord Corlys confirms that they've gained full control of the Sea Stones, which motivates Rhaenyra to change her mind to go on the offensive, because now they will have the advantage to surround King's Landing via sea. And I think the reason for her sudden change of mind is because they saw a way to win without using the dragons and burning everything down. They then plan to contact the houses of Stark and Baratheon in order to gain more allies to their side. And they did this by assigning their sons to ride the dragons across the land to pass the messages on. And this is another query that I had because we see her sons and they're still of a very young age. And whilst they're only arriving as messengers, you still want to have somebody who's of a certain maturity and overall status. Because as we've seen so many times before, whenever a messenger is sent to deliver a certain instruction, it never results in them just leaving away. There's always some sort of discourse, and normally when you are sending a messenger to a higher authority such as a king, you want to make sure that that messenger is mature enough to deliver the message in the way that you want it to be sent. Because if the message is delivered in the wrong way, it could actually instigate further conflict. But despite all of this, she sends her boys all over with the dragons, and we concentrate on one of her sons named Lucerys, and he was sent over to gain favour with one of the kings. But when he arrives there, he sees that Aemond is there, and he arrived there earlier on to ask for them to ally alongside the Hightowers. Viserys passes on the message, but it's rejected by the king, so he is then sent away. But then Aemond, who we all remember had lost his eye earlier on, isn't satisfied. He wants to see somebody lose their eye like he did. And we get that really stunning visual shot where we see the character take off his eye patch, and we see his eye has, it looks like a blue pearl or diamond. And it's a really intense and evil looking character that we have here. And I think there's a lot of promise and potential for what this character can do going forward for seasons 2 and season 3. I haven't read the books, but I'm sure he's going to be a big deal going ahead in the story later on. And I think they've chosen a great actor to really embody the dark spirit of this particular role. We then see Lucerys coming away and riding away on his dragon, who I believe is named Arax. And we get some really stunning visual shots of rain and lightning as we see the young boy flying away on the dragon. And then all of a sudden we get a superb, spectacular moment where we see Lucerys and Arax being pursued by Aemond riding the dragon known as Vhagar, who I believe is the biggest dragon out of them all. And we had that great sequence where we see Arax flying through, and then all of a sudden Vhagar emerges from the sky and really dwarfs him in size. And some very good CGI here where we see both of the dragons maneuvering against one another. We had that cool shot where we saw Arax shooting fire at Vhagar. But it was a strange sequence of events because we see that either of them didn't really have full control of the dragons. And this didn't really make sense, because if Aemond wasn't in control of the dragon and he wasn't trying to kill Lucerys, then why was he chasing him? And it was a bit out of character, because if we've looked at Aemond and his demeanour in previous episodes, he's the one that seems to have it all together, far more in control of his emotions and impulses rather than Aegon, because if you remember, Aegon didn't want to be king to begin with. So it was really strange that Aemond really didn't know what he was doing as the battle between the dragons intensified. We then had a stunning development where it seems that Lucerys and Arax have finally got away. They fly into the atmospheric clouds where everything is bright and sunny, and then all of a sudden Vhagar just comes out and bites Arax in half, killing him and Lucerys, and we see all of the body parts dropping down in the sky. Aemond is caught by surprise because this is not what he intended to do. Again, great stunning shots, great visuals and great music as well. And then we have the final scene played out in slow motion where we see Daemon coming towards the council once again, telling Rhaenyra of the news, and then the music really builds up, and then we see Rhaenyra turning around with a very intense look on her face, and then that's when the episode ends there. So this is obviously leading to the war really intensifying in season 2. And as I mentioned before, this was really a letdown, not in terms of the quality, but in terms of the storytelling, because we ended the episode as some sort of big massive cliffhanger with Rhaenyra really intending to go to war, but they were already going to war anyway, so the death of her son doesn't really up the ante because they were going to go into conflict regardless. So I asked myself, was this really a necessary sequence? Again, if it plays out in the source material, then fair enough. But in terms of the overall story, did we really need an intense dragon encounter? Surely it would have been far better to push the story far forward, where we caught up with Alicent and dealt with the fallout of what happened during Aegon's coronation. But we completely ignored King's Landing in this entire episode, and it just felt wrong. It just felt a bit imbalanced. And as I mentioned before, I think that we should have had this whole entire episode as a penultimate setup. So we catch up with Rhaenyra and Daemon and going through the whole process of dealing with Viserys and building himself up for war. And then you could have had Lucerys being killed, and that ups the ante. And then we have a further episode where we see the conflict play out between the two houses. Again, if they're playing closely to the source material and maybe there are further bigger battles down the line and they're saving those for future seasons, I can understand that to an extent. But from the perspective of this television show, this particular season, it was really such an anticlimactic moment. And we just needed more. We just needed more of a rounded conclusion as well as a cliffhanger moment to leave ourselves appetizing for season 2. And what compounds this disappointment even more so is that season 2 won't be arriving for our screens for at least another 2 years. So I just feel they could have done this far better, and I don't think it affects the overall quality of the season itself. It does mark it down a bit as to how the story ended, but I don't think it was bad enough to really undo all of the great work that we've seen in the previous episodes in terms of the production and the actors' performances. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings on the season 1 finale of House of the Dragon. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think this was a disappointment? I will shortly provide an overall season review of House of the Dragon, where I go into far more depth as the overall episodes themselves, and I will talk a bit about this finale and how I felt it did probably mark the show down a little bit, because I think the finale is the most important episode of the season. It really is the make or break, as it should surmise on what's gone on throughout the entire season and also leave you extremely excited for what happens in the following season. So let me know what you think in the comments below regarding this episode, and if you make some great points and you disagree with anything that I say, then we can have further debate and discussion afterwards. And do the same also for my season 1 review, which will probably be uploaded a day or two after this video is released. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have any other television series or shows or any other topics that you'd love to see me talk about within this channel, then also let me know in the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you in the future. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.